Good evening, everyone. My name is Connor Moran. I'm the director of the Wisconsin Book Festival, and I am delighted to welcome you to this evening's event featuring Sid Meier for Sid Meier's Memoir! And it does have an exclamation point at the end, so you have to say it like that all night long. We are joined as well by David Gagnon from Field Day Lab. He's the director of the Games Learning Program here at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, so welcome, David, as well. I want to take a moment at the beginning here to just say thank you to Madison Public Library and the Madison Public Library Foundation. Their support of free cultural events for Madison, Wisconsin, the nation, and the world as we get into a virtual event schedule has been unwavering, and they have been absolutely wonderful in making sure that we are able to bring these cultural events to everyone in their homes while we are at home. I also want to thank our partners at the Wisconsin Science Festival. Typically, we would do about a dozen events with them over our fall celebration, which is coming up next week, October 15th through the 17th. And unfortunately, just due to time constraints, we've had to shift some of those around. And so this is a little standalone Science Festival, Book Festival, jointly presented event. So thank you to them. I also want to welcome all of you at home and hope that you will come to many more Wisconsin Book Festival events over the next couple of weeks. We have 25 events in the next 10 days. So here we go. This feels like a good start. And so I'd like to welcome Sid Meier, creator of Civilization, which is one of the greatest titles you could ever have. And, you know, maybe Sid gave it to himself, but maybe we gave it to him. I think a lot of us have spent time with Sid's creations and have very many fond memories of playing various Civilizations and other games throughout time. And now we get to learn from Sid himself how he created those, how he became the creator of Civilization. So I'm going to go away now and let Sid and David take it away. Thanks, gentlemen.
Well, it is really my honor to get to talk with you. As we were backstage, if you want to call that, I was just kind of letting you know that this has been just a fantastic book for me to read, and that I feel like this is like meeting a hero of mine for many, many years. So obviously I am the kind of kid that grew up playing your games. You know, I'm a 43-year-old. I kind of watched them all come out and was certainly a player of many of those things. I've got a background in computer science, and I'd say that games were a really big part of my interest in computers, and then later got into educational games because of it. So for me, the book was nostalgic, but it also was full of little bits of design inspiration, and just the way you think about games is so sophisticated, and obviously, you know, produces some of the best games that have ever been made. And then all these little playful bits of history of programming that were in here. So this book just kind of hit a bullseye of my interest. I've been just thoroughly enjoying it for the last 2 weeks. The pages are all rattled and stuff. But who were you really writing this fic for? When you were thinking about it, like, what was the bullseye?
Well, a lot of the book is kind of related to questions that I'll get when I talk to players and gamers. It's kind of one of the joys of being a game designer is talking to people that have played your game, and even though you may not have met them before, you have kind of a shared experience and something that you can talk over. So a lot of these stories and things that are in the book are things that questions that I got from gamers or stories that they found interesting. As time goes on, some of these recede a little bit into the past. So it felt like it was a time to kind of put them down on paper, I guess it is. A lot of, Civilization, a lot of the games in the book happened before the advent of the internet, when everything that ever happened has been archived 100 times. So these things, I didn't want to lose sight of some of these things that I thought were significant. It's kind of, in a way, even though I didn't realize it at the time, I was there pretty much at the beginning of the computer gaming industry. And this is a little part of our origin story as far as computer games are concerned. Today we take them for granted. There's a generation that grew up where computer games were always there. I was part of a generation that had to go through childhood without any computer games. So there's a little bit of perspective there, a little bit of history, and I figured that was that was a good enough reason to write a book.
So that generation that grew up playing as an audience, I find really interesting, because computers certainly have changed quite a bit and software has become significantly more complex. There was a couple spots in the book where you talked about things like little technical hacks, like using a font for animation or the pokey chip that allowed you to do certain kinds of audio. You really were on the forefront of computer science as well. So what I'm kind of curious about here is, as you've been pushing the boundaries of technology the entire time, what have been some of the moments that were particularly fun for you as a designer, to claim a new space and to be able to do a thing you couldn't do before? Were there any things that stuck out, like in your history?
That was definitely part of the early days of making games, was having an understanding of the technology. We were very limited in the amount of memory we had, the number of colors we had, the speed of the computers. So being an efficient programmer was an important part of being a game designer. And so I do recall the first time I grasped 3D graphics with F19 and was able to create a wireframe airplane that I could actually rotate and spin around, and that became a game. And a little later with Commodore 64, we discovered how to smoothly scroll a map across the screen, not moving character by character, but pixel by pixel. And this was an amazing breakthrough. And so, like, what are we going to do with a scrolling map? Let's make a pirates game where that's the Caribbean and you're sailing all across the ocean. So a lot of our earlier games were actually inspired by a piece of technology that put something up on the screen that we had never seen before, and inspired us to create a game around it. Things have, of course, changed a lot now, and the technology can do anything you can imagine, and the only challenge is how to stop, because games can become ever more complicated and whatever, and that's really not their point. So from kind of pushing up against the boundaries of technology, we've now gone to trying to restrain ourselves from overdoing the use of technology.
Yeah, that was actually the question that kind of came right with the first one, which is, are there moments where you've maybe been inspired by technology and it's inspired you in the wrong direction? And even better yet, have you ever formulated kind of a philosophy of like how, like when high fidelity actually doesn't give you any more payoff? Like when better graphics and better audio don't get players to where you want them to go?
Yeah, I think there's a couple dimensions to that. Certainly, the original Civilization, you could play it in a 4-color graphics mode. So we were asking your imagination to jump on board and provide a lot of the experience there. And in a way, that was a handicap. But in another way, it immersed the player in the game perhaps more deeply than a fully 3D cinematically rendered world might. So I think that there are trade-offs. I think as the visuals and the sound and all the presentation aspects of the games got better, it enlarged the audience. It made games more accessible, and we've certainly seen this in its immense growth in the audience. But games then kind of evolved from, something for the geeks and the hackers to a worldwide general audience experience, because the graphics improved, the presentation, they looked better, they sounded better, et cetera. But it's been a process, and we've lost a little bit of that requirement to use your imagination, perhaps.
Yeah, it's something that I have been really curious about for a long time now, which is, when you started making games, even getting the game to run was a very complicated process, right? Like you got to load drivers into high memory and figure out how to get the DMA address of your Sound Blaster or whatever working. And by the time you got the game, the payoff was so significant just to get the title screen up. Now there's the world of like app stores, and I can go on my Xbox right now and like click a button and it'll automatically take money out of my checking account, and I'll have a new game. There's no waiting to figure that stuff out. How do you feel like that kind of immediacy, and maybe even the lack of or the change from hackers to a more broad audience, how has that changed the way you think of like the experiences you design for people? Like, has that had an impact on you as a designer?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, it's not just games. I mean, music. You can now, you had to go to the store and buy an LP and put it on your turntable, and now you press a button. Or, if you need a new charger for your iPhone, you press, a button on the screen and it arrives the next day. We've totally embraced the world of instant gratification, and computer games are certainly no exception to that. However, I think a lot of the fundamentals that made games compelling and fun have really not changed. I talk a lot about this idea of interesting decisions and what's at the core of a game, and those concepts really haven't changed a whole lot. So what makes a good game probably hasn't changed as much as all the technology and all the peripheral aspects have. What this new world of instant gratification means specifically for us with a game like Civilization is that we were very fortunate to be around at a time when the market wasn't as full of different options, and that people did make an investment. If you spent that time configuring your sound card, etc., you were going to probably play that game for a while, even if it didn't grab you right at the beginning. You'd spent this time, so I'm going to put another hour into this. So games could be a little, maybe have a little more depth, take a little more time, kind of getting you involved. So we're kind of fortunate to have that history that really kind of provides us a little bit of an advantage in today's world of instant gratification.
You made reference to this phrase of how, and we're kind of segmenting, starting to talk about like what a game is and kind of defining it a little bit, but you made this kind of famous quote of games are a series of interesting choices. And there's a passage in the book I was hoping to read because I found it, like I actually shut the book and then wrote down the entire passage because I think it gets at this so well. And it's right at the beginning of the text. So you write, the important takeaway is that it's a mindset that looks outward rather than inward. We're surrounded by decisions and therefore games in everything we do. Interesting might be subject to personal taste to some degree, but the gifts of agency, that is the ability for players to exert free will over all their surroundings rather than obediently following a narrative, is what sets games apart from other media, regardless of whether that agency is expressed through a computer keyboard, plastic tokens, physical movement, or entirely in the mind. So I really like this part. And then I think you really hit on it here, where you say, let's see, it's no subject is universally boring. Everything contains a core of fascination somewhere. And the primary job of the game designer is not to make something fun, but to find the fun. And that single sentence I find to be just kind of profound. So I'm kind of curious, I spent a lot of time with folks that are educators and they're thinking about games as an education media. The whole book is kind of walking around this idea of like how the fun relates with the topic and sometimes where factual accuracy plays in for better or for worse. And I'm really curious, as you look out at the world, like have you had any moments recently even where you've said, you can see someone doing something and you think, I can find the fun in that? Or have you had any examples of times where you've seen educational games particularly that you feel like have really done this? They found the fun in a topic instead of trying to put the fun on it.
Well, I mean, that idea of finding the fun is core to how we think about games and how we make games. I think a good example is a game like Civilization. 1,000 different games could have been made on that topic. And so we had to get rid of 999 of them to make the game that we did. So kind of finding the fun is fundamental to the initial process of making a game. As far as finding the fun in life, so I've kind of had to learn how to cook in these COVID times, and my wife, we have a deal. She agrees to clean if I'll cook, so that's a good deal.
We have the same deal in our family right now. Yeah.
So I try to make it fun. I try to make a game out of it. Okay, what loot is in the refrigerator right now? That I can use to create this masterpiece. How can I make something new that I haven't made before? How can I make this a fun experience? There's new sounds of something frying up in the frying pan, new smells, and there's, it's kind of like, it could be a bore, it could be a drag, but I think there's also a way of making it fun and a fun experience. So there's planning involved. I don't know. It's it's an example perhaps of finding the fun in unexpected places.
You come around to that a similar theme later on in chapter 6, and you are describing flight simulator, and you have this phrase that I really like. You said, games aren't supposed to train you how to be a real pilot. They were supposed to let you pretend for an hour that you could be one if you really wanted to. And in that, I think there's something really interesting about the relationship between the games that you make and high levels of kind of technical accuracy. And to turn this to Civ, I mean, Civilization is one of the most complex, multidisciplinary media maybe ever made, right? Like there is so much that's going into that, from philosophy to history to economics to government to religion. I would love it if you could talk a little bit about how you navigated finding the fun within such an absurdly complex, well, literally civilization simulator.
It was actually a process with a lot of pruning. There was a lot that was in the original Civ that we took out or we found was kind of confusing the process. Well, the vision that we had was that the player would always be in the future. In their mind, they would always be projecting, okay, if I move here, if I build this, this will happen. If I explore here, this will happen. If I go to war, then this will happen. Maybe I should make peace. So your mind is kind of always thinking into the future, and that leads to the dreaded one more turn. But we found that if the systems are too complicated, you're living in the past. You're trying to figure out, well, what did I just do? I'm just going to try something. I have no idea what's going to happen. So even though all these elements are part of the game, economics, military, exploration, diplomacy, science, they are represented in very graspable terms. That there's a bucket. If you fill it with food, a new population point arises. There's another bucket. If you fill it with science, you now have the wheel. You now have discovered electricity. So yes, these concepts are great civilization concepts, but they're ones that you grasp. They're under your control. And as if it's presented in that way, you can take what could potentially be a very complicated and confusing topic and turn it into one that the player has mastery of, which is the satisfaction. I mean, there's an immense amount of satisfaction in that, and that's kind of what the game of Civilization is about.
Did you, or could you speak a little bit to what kind of research needed to happen, or how you even partnered with other researchers that represented those fields?
Yes, we actually have a semi-joke that we tell around the office, which is we do the research after the game is done to justify whatever decisions we've made to make the game more fun. So, we've been criticized because certain elements of the world are not represented in Civilization. Some of the uglier parts of the world are not represented. That's a conscious decision to emphasize the fun experience. Yeah, as you mentioned with the flying a plane, we're not there to teach you how to fly a plane because it takes many, many hours and it's mostly boring. We're there to give you the highlights and give you the kind of feeling of mastery where, yeah, I could fly a plane if I spent the time, but I got the gist of it. I'm going to move on to running a civilization now. So it's kind of designing an experience around what is going to be most fun for the player. And we make those decisions all the time about what to put in and what to take out.
Have you ever had a time where you made a decision in a game that ended up kind of backfiring? Like it ended up being where in your pursuit of fun, someone got really offended or thought that they weren't represented well in the game, or?
I avoid the internet forums for just that reason. Not, not in the sense of, oh, we made a terrible mistake. I've heard from a long time, we've heard from the Canadians, like, why is Canada not, a major civilization in the game? And finally, we put them in there to keep them happy. But, there's certain, everyone has an opinion, and almost every game player is also a game designer, and will be happy to tell you their game design ideas. So, I don't take those as criticisms. I take them as valuable commentary that we will take under consideration.
So I've got to ask you this, and I'm kind of like throwing my entire career kind of under your boot here. But page 82, you say, nothing killed fun as much as a stickler for realism. And again, and it's just on this whole theme of finding fun, right? So as an educational game designer, the battle is real, right? It's trying to find the fun and while being accurate. And we've got some strategies for that, certainly. But in your mind, do you think educational gaming is even possible? Or would you say that is there something like an oxymoron in that compared to, your philosophy of finding the fun?
Well, I think all gaming is educational, at some level, in some sense. And what we have found is that that learning is a key to the fun in a game. That this idea that I've played the game and now I am a little smarter, I understand it better, I'm going to do a little better next time, I'm going to try something out, and I've learned something. So I think people enjoy learning, and that's a key component of gaming. Now, educating is slightly different from learning. I think learning is more self-directed, self-paced, etc. And I think the more of those elements that can be part of an educational experience, the better. But I think everything is being gamified these days, and education is certainly one of them. And we've heard from high schools and universities where they're using civilization in the classroom to teach different things. And we've been asked, I remember back a while back, we actually, in the earlier days, we were asked by the Air Force to make a version of F-15 probably that they could use that, accurately represented all the instruments and gauges and dials, et cetera, of the F-15. And it was kind of like, that's not what we do. It's not like we couldn't make it more accurate. We could make it more accurate, but at a certain point, it leaves the player behind, and that's not the point that we want to go past.
Yeah, that's just a matter of kind of having the right target. So
well, we
knowing what it
honor,
is.
Yeah, we revere the player. I mean, one of our fundamental rules is the player is the star of the game. And one of the questions we ask repeatedly is, who is having the fun right now? Is the player having the fun? Is the designer having the fun by amazing you with their incredible knowledge? Is the computer having the fun by cranking away at some incredible model in there? No, it's the player that has to be having the fun. That is the goal. And so, if accuracy impedes the player from having fun, then we're going to have to, do something differently, or, so kind of keeping the player experience front and center is just core to making a game.
This kind of leads me into a series of questions really around the process of making games as you relate to the player. So in chapter 7, you talk, about a time when letters that you would receive in the mail from players were like a primary form of feedback. And then obviously we're in a world that is moving more and more towards data and using large amounts of data to make decisions, from, everything, the design of a website to, in the case of our studio, we use data to inform our game design. How do you think your own process of relating with players has changed over the period of, 20, 30 years now? Like what have been some of the major milestones in it where you feel like you're relating differently with the player, just by the media even you can communicate with them with?
Yeah, the form of feedback has changed quite a bit. The content, maybe not so much. We've always made games that we ourselves want to play. So we are kind of our initial target audience. and that gives us an advantage. And iteration is just, again, a fundamental part of our design process. We want to have something playable, often within the first week or two, that we're actually getting the gist of the play experience, and then we iterate and evolve on that and add things, and if they work, we keep them. If they don't work, we take them out. But we're for a very long time making a game for ourselves. And then at a certain point, we will bring in play testers, other people to play. Often that's a very enlightening experience. It's very easy to kind of go down this path of getting better and better and better at the game, and assuming more about what players do and know and will do, and you have to kind of then realize that your assumptions are a little too generous, and you have to kind of make sure you've got that wide range of difficulty levels and tutorial and all those things that make the game easy to start playing. Once the game goes out into the wild, we'll start to get more feedback. Some of it via telemetry, some of it via internet feedback. Often some good ideas. It's been one of the advantages we have is that Civilization is an ongoing franchise, so that we can take advantage of some of those ideas, and put them into the next iteration or the next expansion. And the game continues to get more interesting and more diverse. So the players have been part of the Civ experience ever since Civ 2, when we introduced modding and kind of allowed them to express their game design interests. And so it's been this synergy between us as designers, but the community as designers and players and commenters as well, that has really made Civ what it it's allowed it to be around for 30 years now.
Yeah, you touched on a couple things that I want to follow up with a little bit. I mean, one of them is this idea that you're constantly iterating, and then a franchise like Civilization, I mean, you've made 7 of them now, right? So yeah. You're iterating at a time scale of years and years sometimes. I feel like there is a common narrative that plays out where hacker kid spends a weekend inventing a new app or a new game and then becomes a billionaire overnight. And that doesn't seem to line up with the story that you're telling. Like if you would speak a little bit more into iteration, I'd just be really curious to hear how tight of a fist do you hold your initial ideas in, and how much do you think the original ideas that you start with ever make it through the process?
Well, originally there is a vision of what could be fun about this. I mean, if you talk about something like pirates or railroads or the history of civilization, there's a certain, I think, almost a visceral, this is what probably going to be fun about this. Now, how do we bring that to life? How do we let the player experience that? That's the process of iteration. Take Civilization, for example. It must feel very satisfying to create this great civilization. Okay, so what are the pieces of creating a great civilization? It's managing your people, discovering new technology. Okay, so how do we let the player take the leading role and make those things happen? That's where the iteration comes in. We need science. Okay, how does science work? Filling a bucket with light bulbs? That's not obvious that's the way to do it. So we probably tried 2 or 3 other things, and we found that if you fill a bucket with light bulbs, you get it, and it makes sense. So the iteration is kind of finding the ways to make these concepts that are there, these nuggets of fun that you are aware is part of this topic, but how do you give the player ownership of those things? And that's the process of iteration, finding those systems and those mechanics that will make that happen.
I mean, maybe it's just a question of pure scale, but I'm not sure that most folks that play your games have even an order of magnitude understanding of the number of iterations that a game goes through, even at the really early phases. Like, could you just maybe answer that? Like, when you say iterate, like, how many times does a typical Sid Meier game get iterated on before it makes it to the public?
Often daily. There are many times when I will go to somebody and say, don't play yesterday's version because today's is so much better. So it is you know, often daily and sometimes more frequently that a new version will appear. I mean, I'm constantly what I refer to as sitting in all the chairs. Like I'll design something and I'll be the designer, sit in the designer chair for a little bit and I'll have an idea and I'll go over to the programmer chair and program that into the game and then jump over to the player chair and play it and see if it works. And I'll yell over to the designer that it kind of works, but you need to fix this. So I'm kind of rotating around these three chairs, design, programming, and playing constantly. And so we're iterating all the time. And so I'd say hundreds of iterations goes into the final game with the goal of it feeling inevitable, that there's no other way even though there were 100 different games that led up to this, all playing a little bit differently, we want the player to feel this is the only way this game could have ever happened, worked. There's nothing here that can, makes me think, I wouldn't have done it that way, or they should have done it this way. Hopefully we've had all those experiences and changed them so that the final product feels almost inevitable.
I love how clean that is. Have you ever had any times where things came off rails a little bit, and during that process you say, you know what, we've got to bail on this idea?
Actually, of all the prototypes that I've started, I'd say probably less than half of them have actually turned into finished games. So yeah, there are times when the vision that you have, the fun that you think is there is just a little bit out of reach. You just can't make it happen, and then it's time to try something else. So yeah, we not everything, even in a game that's successful, probably a third or more of the ideas that we tried were taken out, just didn't work. So it's a process of iteration that allows us to realize those things early and hopefully fix them.
You mentioned sitting in different chairs, and this is one of the other kind of threads I wanted to pull on a little bit, which is, I think a lot of people that would read this book and follow you are not only interested in your games, but probably are interested in game design. And I would say that of most young people I've talked to, when they think about being a game designer, they primarily think about software engineering. Like that's what game development is software engineers. You've gone from being a single person studio all the way to running a very large studio. How would you describe some of the main roles that exist on a team? And I'd also be kind of curious, like, what percentages do you put on them? Like, how many engineers do you need for every artist, kind of thing? Like, what do you think the breakdown is?
There are many roles in putting a game together. Certainly software engineering, programming, but there are subcategories within that. There are engine designers, 3D graphics, user interface, artificial intelligence, just the file management, load and save. I mean, there's a bunch of different pieces that require somewhat different skills, and when you get into networking, et cetera. So there's a bunch of different software skills that are needed. Within the art domain, there are many different skills: modeling, texturing, animating, lighting, creating backgrounds, and others. And then in terms of sound, there's music, scores, sound effects, voiceover. I mean, there's a bunch of stuff. And in addition to producing and managing and trying to keep projects on track. So in terms of numbers, probably, I'd say 50% artists, 30% programmers, 10% sound, and 10% production would be a rough breakdown.
What excites me about that is I think conversely, a lot of kids that don't feel technically minded.
1% designer.
Oh yeah, 1% designer, right?
No, everybody participates in design to some extent, but at the end of the day, somebody's got to make the decisions. So
I really like that. That's so inviting, I think, to a lot of different people. You know, like it's a media that's complicated enough that it needs pretty much all hands on deck. You know, like it's not just a bunch of technical folks. It really is storytellers and artists and such. And I find that really interesting. You're even saying that the majority, the largest group, would fall more into what I would call like creatives compared to engineering types. Has that changed, do you think, over the years? Or do you think that that's just kind of like what a game is?
That has changed. I think as the capabilities, the graphic capabilities have expanded from 2D top down to 2.5D to 3.5D to cinematic movies, the requirement for art, the expectation for art has grown. So that part of the project has probably grown the most. But the technical side has as well with networking and multiplayer and the 3D graphics also require a lot of software. So yeah, both sides have expanded, but a bit more on the art side.
There's another thing I wanted to pull up before we move on to our next theme, which I wanted to be around the industry itself. But you mentioned modding just in our conversation now, and in the book, you had this moment you kind of described as a bit of surprise when you saw what people were doing with the ability to mod Civilization 2. Could you quickly describe like what modding is? And then just as a designer, I'd love it if you could speak a little bit to how modding has changed the relationship between the designer and the player.
Modding is the ability to change some of the kind of fundamental parts of a game to your whim or desire. In a game like Civilization, you could change the names of units or their movement rates or their attack or defense or the characteristics of different leaders, the way maps are generated, kind of all sorts of creative things that allow the game to be different from the one that we shipped. And I think we recognize certainly that with Civ that a lot of people had game design ideas, and modding gives them an opportunity to exercise them. And we've seen an incredible amount of creativity there. Taking Civilization and making it a science fiction game, or adding zombies to the game, or making it a Lord of the Rings or medieval, or so. Kind of, it's added a whole new dimension to Civ. I mean, Civ, often it's 5 years from one Civ to the next, and a lot of the modding that is then shared with the community keeps the game fresh in players' experience. So it's been a real compliment to the game that we release. All the mods kind of add whole new dimensions to the game.
Have you ever had any particular moments where you've seen what people have done with your games and just been deeply surprised?
Well, yeah, there's a when Civilization went out, the original Civilization, we had no idea whether it would be successful. And in fact, MicroProse was really focusing on flight games and military games at the time. So it was kind of a surprise that that the game became successful. And so we decided we need to make another one of these because people seem to like it. And they looked at me and I said, everything I know about this game I put into Civilization. I don't have any ideas for another one. And then Brian Reynolds raised his hand and said, wait a minute, I've got some ideas. So he created Civ 2 with some things that did surprise me. One of them was the capability to mod. And this was right there on the main screen. You could mod up a storm, and I said, Brian, well, this is going to take all the fun out of the game. You can be playing and you'll be losing, and you just kind of change the rules, and that's no fun. But then one day I saw my son playing the game. He was, I don't know, maybe 10 or 11 at the time. And I was watching him play, and he would go to the mod, and here was some barbarians coming after him, and he'd plop down like 5 tanks and wipe them out. And there was this huge smile on his face. And I said, oh, okay, I get it. It can be fun to play a little bit outside of the rules. And I had been kind of tunnel visioned on the game as I imagined it to be played, and kind of modding allowed other people to play it more as they imagined it, and that was that kind of opened up the game, a whole dimension of fun to players.
That kind of leads me to another question right in here, which is, it's quite obvious that your games are played by a lot of people. Have there been any moments where you've heard from a letter or the internet forum you don't go to, any times where your games have really had an impact on someone and it affected you, to hear that story?
It's always gratifying to hear a good Civ story. I mean, we do hear from folks that might have had to retake a year of college or something because they were spending too much time playing games. But there was a story we heard from a young boy who had amazed his teacher by knowing all the cities of the Caribbean, by having played Pirates and studying the map. He now knew where every city in the Caribbean was. We also received a letter from a boy who said, Sid, thanks for your game. Your game saved my family. One night my mom was staying up really late playing Civilization. She couldn't stop, and it was late at night, and she smelled some smoke, and there was a fire, and she got our family out of the house, and so your game saved our family. So there are a few positive Civ stories out there.
This is an audience question that came in that I thought was really interesting, just kind of while we're on the topic of Civilization. And it was, if Civilization was first made in the context of the 2020s, versus the 1990s, what do you think would be different about maybe some of the core premises that exist within it?
That's an interesting question. I think a lot depends on what not having the original Civ would mean for games today. Would we still have the 4X genre? Would we still, Civilization, I think in a way kind of made the world safe for strategy gaming. And we've seen the Civilization series, but also other games kind of taking advantage of that style of gaming and the appeal of how that works. So I think if strategy gaming and 4X gaming were around and we were doing a new, just starting with Civilization, it's hard to believe nobody else would have grabbed that idea by now, but I think we would, we'd probably ease players into it a little more in the same way that Civ 1 kind of was an introduction to the 4X genre, and subsequent games have expanded on that. I think we would probably also think in terms of kind of easing into it at this point. But the core concepts have held up amazingly well over the years. So I think we would still be using many of those same ideas. The idea of turn-based, I think, is allows the player to really dive deeply into the decisions that the game presents them. The scenario, the scope of the game, the epicness of the game is part of what makes it appealing. And I think we would do that today in the same way that we did it back then.
I mean, it certainly is. I can't think of any other game that is as widely scoped. I mean, Civilization's pretty big. It'd be a universe simulator, would be like the next step up. One of the things that I've always been very curious about, and we've kind of come at this from a couple angles, but I'm going to ask the question kind of right center too, is, when you're talking about religion and economics and government structures and the history of civilization, I mean, there are a lot of very nuanced and subtle details in the middle of this that people spend their whole careers studying and arguing about. And here you are as a game designer, finding the fun in all of that and pulling it together. I'm really curious if you've had any moments or even like some philosophies that guide your design where you decide when, games, like a particular topic or a particular element within the game might not be a good fit for the game. Or maybe said another way, are there certain topics that are too subtle and too complicated for an entertainment game to get into? And how do you suss that out before you go down that path?
It's not so much the subtlety or the, subtlety we can unsubtle and complexity we can simplify, but it's really a kind of moral ambiguity or moral dilemmas that we tend to avoid in terms of we don't want there to be one path which leads to victory but makes you feel bad about winning or what you had to do to get there. That is not the kind of experience that we're trying to create. So where there are kind of areas that are controversial or would cause, we're not there to impose our philosophy or our politics or our morality on the player. Again, the player is the star, and anything that kind of makes them feel uncomfortable or not not invested or not willing to own the experience is going to take away from the game. So we do avoid some issues that are not going to make the game experience more fun, just make it I think make you feel uncomfortable about playing. So we'll leave those things out.
Yeah, that seems like what I would guess is that you've got more of like a curation kind of approach, like just making sure to leave some things out. There's one issue that I find as a designer is complicated because you can't leave it out, and that's any idea of representation. So whenever you've got different kinds of people that are inside of a game, whether they represent China or whether they represent a female or whether they represent a Black man, representation is always happening in games. And it's something that our team has to talk about a lot, which is, how do we navigate that? Do you have any kind of inside theories or ways that you think about that when you are representing people in your games?
Well, I think we have the luxury now in Civ of representing almost every civilization known to the world. I think an earlier criticism of civilization might have been that it represented, a Western view of history, but that's something that we've been able to, over the years, expand to include, many diverse civilizations. I think we're also dealing with things at a fairly simplistic and kind of understood level. One of our other jokes is that we do our research in the children's section of the library because we're using concepts that everybody kind of agrees on. If you invent the wheel, then now we can build a chariot. There's not a controversial statement. I think that there's a lot of things that we all agree on. And those are the foundations, the tenets, the fundamental things about the game ideas, because that makes them playable. I mean, if we're trying to introduce ideas that you're not familiar with or not comfortable with, the game is just harder to play. So if we can go to the children's section and use these ideas that we all understand and agree on, then you're focused on playing the game and not trying to understand what are my biases or what are my Where am I coming from? That's not the question. What are you going to do? That's the question.
There, I kind of wanted to shift it a little bit, and this is these are more like very, well, memoir-like questions, really. And, you've had literally a life in computer games. And I'm really curious, to frame some of the highs and lows in that. This is a little exercise to do with my kids over dinner. And we talk about highs and lows of the game. Do you have any moments, and I'm hoping that it's not inappropriate to ask, but moments where you kind of look back at your career in video games and feel like, wow, I really, like, that I shouldn't have done, or that project was a mistake, or this was a real low point in my career that it's defining, the mistake.
Well, I've been able to make computer games for 40 years, so I don't have a lot of complaints. There are prototypes that I thought were going to be great and didn't turn out to be as fun as I thought they would be. There are bugs that I put in games and didn't find until later. So I mean, certainly there's a few things that I could have done a little better. But I have the best job in the world, and I've been a part of making some games that I'm very proud of. So I have really no complaints about the life in computer games.
So you're pulling me right to the highs. Do you have any particularly shining moments, things that you really just kind of had a double step in your heart? You felt like, wow, I am right where I need to be right now. This is the life I want.
There's certainly a lot of those moments. I mean, there are days when I say, I've done like a week's worth of work today. I mean, I got this thing to work that I thought it was going to be super complicated, and it just all came together. But I think I probably look back at a couple of years that I worked together with Bruce Shelley, and we made Railroad Tycoon and Civilization, and just before that, I'd made Pirates. It's a little bit of a golden age in terms of where the technology was, where we were as game designers, and where the audience was, and kind of ready to accept some new ideas and try some new things. Where I think we established some a foundation for games that we were going to make, and also for some genres that other people have pursued. So, if I was looking for a high point, it would probably be those years when we put out the games that fill up a few chapters of this book.
Yeah. I mean, kind of turning to the future, and even, the chapters that haven't been written yet. There's an audience question that came in that I have my own version of, but I really like this. Do you have something that's kind of been on the horizon, like something you've wanted to make that's not under some sort of non-disclosure agreement? It's like some dream project, the one that always got away, the one that's always right around the corner. Is there any project like that that's just kind of been floating around in your mind for a while?
And not really. I mean, I've actually had the luxury of being able to pursue almost every game idea that intrigued me or fascinated me. And so I have to say, there like I mentioned, there are prototypes lying around that never got made, and I talk a little bit about the dinosaur game in the book, and how that started off with such high expectations and kind of never got to where it needed to go, but it was very, very much a learning experience through three different, completely different prototypes and different genres and different approaches. And in some ways, I might have learned more from that experience than I would have learned from a game that worked out. So, but in general, I've been fortunate enough to be able to work on the games that intrigue me, and there's nothing there's no white whale out there.
Mm-hmm. So I guess this is one of my last questions here, actually, is there a direction where you feel like gaming as a media is going, or the industry is going, that particularly excites you?
I think the excitement is in the constant change. There's always been a synergy between game design and game technology, whether it was more colors on the screen, 3D acceleration chips, the CD-ROM, the internet, consoles. There's always something new that injects a new energy into gaming, either from the hardware side or seminal games like Minecraft or Tetris, or the games that really kind of shake up and open up new doors and new possibilities. So something new will come along. Something new is going to happen. That's pretty much guaranteed. I don't know what it's going to be, but we'll find a way to make a game out of it. I can guarantee you that.
I want to read another quote for the last question, and it was right near the end of the book. And you're talking about the explanation point, which is kind of a fun, it's just a thing. It's like almost a brand. And you said, you're talking about Sid Meier explanation point, and you say, it's really just Sid without the explanation point in all his best moments. Not only is the italicized version of me very different than the original model that sits at my desk every day, but it's an actual different person for every individual. And this is frozen in time for whatever gaming experience stands out most for them. To some people, I'm the wise old teacher who guided them through their teen years, and to others, I'm a secret goofy friend who pretended to be a pirate with them when everyone else said that they're too old for that sort of thing. I really like this idea of the italicized explanation point version of Sid Meier. And I'm really curious if you've translated some of those, some of the way that you approach the world into something you feel like you could share with the audience of your book. Like if you had to describe some of the things that allowed normal sit at your desk Sid Meier kind of earn the italics, do you have any like little kind of short phrases that you feel like might be at the center of that?
Well, I'm kind of always looking forward to what I'm going to do today. I mean, that's really what motivates me, what gets me out of bed, what gets me excited. If I'm working on a game, some new ideas will pop into my head, and I'll look forward to seeing it, whether they work or they don't work. I think learning is satisfying, exploring, trying new things. That's what keeps me going. The non exclamation point Sid Meier. I think that the exclamation point Sid Meier is kind of thinking about things I have done and talking to people about them and relating them, and there's a lot of satisfaction in that as well. But those are two very different Sid Meiers. When I'm working on a new game, I'm not, patting myself on the back about some game that I wrote in the past. And when I'm talking about games in the past, I can't tell you what I'm working on now. So, those are two different frames of mind, I guess, but they're both enjoyable.
That's great. Well, I have to congratulate you. The book is pretty fantastic. Again, I really enjoyed it. Thanks for the free copy. They're on sale now? Is it out this month now?
Yes, it's available now.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, I hope that, I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. And I think we've got most of the questions I think we got all the questions from the audience folded in one way or another. So yeah, again, I just really thank you for your time.
Thank you.
The work you've done has been such an inspiration to our lab, and certainly all the games that we've made. So again, it's just really an honor to get some time talking with you and picking your brain beyond the stories in your memoir.
Enjoy it.
Oh no. Oh, I mean, vote with your feet. I mean, I'll just be honest. I feel like Civ 3 was the one I put the most amount of hours into. So you vote with your hours, right?